I live in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac in Aurora, Colorado. The kind of place where every house looks like it came from the same blueprint. Everyone waves when they drive by, and the loudest noise at night is usually someone's sprinkler kicking on. I'd lived there for 4 years without anything strange ever happening. No weird neighbors, no crime, nothing out of the ordinary. But last winter, something changed. Or maybe it had been changing slowly, and I just never noticed until it was too late. Right across from my house was a beige two-story home that had been empty for almost a year. The owners moved out suddenly. No for sale sign, no moving truck. One week they were there, the next week the windows were dark and the driveway was empty. The neighborhood gossip said the family moved to take care of an elderly parent, but nobody really knew. All I knew was that the house always made me uncomfortable. Even though it looked perfectly normal, I always felt like someone was watching from inside it, particularly from the upstairs window that faced my bedroom. The weirdness started on a Sunday night in January. I had just pulled into my driveway after visiting my brother. It was around 11 p.m., freezing, silent, and every house on the street except mine was dark. When I stepped out of my car, I felt that prickly sensation that someone was watching me. I glanced across the cul-de-sac toward the empty house, and for a second, I saw a light flicker on in the upstairs window. Not a lamp, not a ceiling light, a flashlight, a quick, shaky beam of light. It moved across the room and then disappeared. I stood there for a long time, staring at the window. There were no cars in the driveway, no signs anyone had moved in. The house was supposed to be empty, but someone was definitely inside. I went inside, locked everything, and told myself I'd imagined it. The next night, it happened again. This time I was brushing my teeth when I noticed movement through the gap in my blinds. The same window across the street, the one that perfectly lined up with mine, had a silhouette standing behind it. A human shape, very still, facing my house. I froze. The hair on my arm stood up. The silhouette didn't move for at least 10 seconds. Then it slowly stepped backward into darkness. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, if she knew whether the house had been sold. She said no. She hadn't seen anyone around it. But then she said something that bothered me. "You're not the first one to say you've seen things," she told me. "Last month, I thought I saw someone in the backyard. But when I went outside, no one was there." I asked if she called the police. She smiled nervously. "You know how it is. You get older, your eyes play tricks on you." I didn't want to look foolish. I wasn't convinced it was tricks of the eyes, but I didn't push her. That night, things escalated. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, disoriented, trying to figure out where it was coming from. When I turned toward my window, my stomach dropped. The tapping was coming from my bedroom window. I lifted myself just enough to peek over the edge of the bed. Someone was standing outside. Not right up against the glass. They were several feet back, near the edge of my yard. A tall figure. Their face wasn't visible, but I could see the shape of a hood or long hair. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The tapping stopped, but the figure stayed there, watching. After maybe 10 seconds, they turned and walked quickly across the street, straight toward the empty house. I scrambled to the window and watched as the figure slipped through the side yard and disappeared behind the house. I called the police immediately. 2 cruisers showed up. The officers checked the property, walked through the backyard, and even shined flashlights through the windows. But every door was locked, every window sealed. Nobody inside. They suggested it might have been a trespasser who ran off. When I asked if they'd actually checked the interior, they shook their heads. No forced entry. If someone was living inside, there'd be signs. I wasn't satisfied, but I didn't have evidence. The next few days were quiet. I tried convincing myself that maybe someone had been using the abandoned house as a temporary hangout. Suburban neighborhoods are quiet. It wouldn't be impossible. Then, on Friday night, I found something on my front porch. A sticky note. No envelope. No signature. Just a scribble in shaky handwriting. "Stop looking at me." My chest tightened. I scanned the neighborhood. No movement. No lights turning off. No footsteps. But the note was fresh. The ink wasn't even dry. Someone had been at my door minutes before I found it. I called the police again. They sent a different officer this time. A younger guy who looked exhausted and clearly didn't want to deal with it. He asked if I had cameras. I didn't. He shrugged and said without video, there wasn't much they could do, but he'd file a report. That was it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every night, I kept my blinds closed. And every night, I felt the same presence staring from across the street. Waiting. Everything came to a head 2 weeks later. It was a Wednesday, around 1 a.m. I was up late working on my laptop in the living room when I heard footsteps on my porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Then the sound of someone trying the doorknob. I froze. The knob jiggled again. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear in my ears. I grabbed a kitchen knife and tiptoed toward the door. Whoever was outside suddenly stepped away from the door and walked off the porch. I peeked through the peephole. What I saw still makes my skin crawl. A man, tall, thin, wearing a long dark coat, was walking across the street. Not hurried, not scared, just calmly making his way back toward the empty house. But the worst part? He turned around halfway across the street, like he knew I was watching, and looked directly at my door. Even through the peephole, his smile was unnatural. Stretched too far, too wide. He slowly raised a finger to his lips. Then he walked into the side yard of the abandoned house and vanished from view. I called 911, shaking so badly I could barely speak. This time, the police broke in through the back door. The interior was pitch black, cold, and smelled like mildew. They searched every room, every closet, the attic, the basement. Nobody was there, but they did find something. In the upstairs bedroom, the one facing my house, someone had taped a piece of paper to the wall. It had one sentence written on it. "I can see you better from here." The officers removed the note, took pictures, and said they'd notify the property owner. The next morning, the house was boarded up. New locks were installed. And over the next couple weeks, contractors came in and sealed every access point. The figure never came back. No more tapping. No more silhouettes in the window. No more notes. To this day, I don't know who was living in that house. The police never gave me answers. The property owner never contacted the neighborhood. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind hits the boarded-up windows across the cul-de-sac, it sounds like someone lightly tapping, like they're still there, still watching, still waiting for the boards to come down. And I keep wondering, what would have happened if I hadn't seen him that night? What would have happened if I'd opened the door? I live in a pretty typical suburban neighborhood. Identical houses, trimmed lawns, couples walking dogs in the evening, kids riding scooters in the cul-de-sac. It's the kind of place you move when you want peace. Safety. Predictability. I used to take that for granted. Until the night, I realized someone had been walking our neighborhood at exactly 3 a.m. every night, for months, and none of us noticed. Well, not until it became impossible to ignore. It started last spring when I randomly woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was, but something felt off. I remember the room being darker than usual, heavier, like the air had weight. I got up for water and happened to glance out the front window. A man was walking down the sidewalk, slowly, deliberately. He wasn't wearing anything unusual, just dark pants and a gray hoodie with the hood up, but something about him immediately bothered me. Maybe it was how still his body was while he walked. His shoulders didn't move. His arms didn't swing. He walked like a machine. But what stuck with me was how he kept his head perfectly tilted toward the houses. Not forward, not down, toward the homes, like he was inspecting each one. I remember thinking he was probably a random insomniac out for a walk. Weird, sure, but harmless. Until I checked the time, 3 a.m. 2 nights later, I woke up again around the same time. I didn't hear anything. I just woke up, like something was telling me to be alert. This time I went straight to the window. He was there again. Same man, same hoodie, same slow, robotic walk. Same exact time, 3:03 a.m. I watched him for almost 30 seconds. His head moved from house to house, like he was scanning windows for something, looking for movement, checking who was awake. When he reached the streetlight near my house, I expected him to keep walking like before. But he didn't. He stopped, right under the glow of the streetlight, and he turned his head toward my house. No movement, no shifting weight, just a slow, unnatural turn, almost like his head rotated first and the rest of his body followed a second later. That movement still bothers me. His hood shadowed most of his face, but I could see his mouth. He was smiling. a long, stretched-out smile that didn't look human. I backed away from the window and didn't check again until morning. The next day, I casually asked my neighbor, Jason, if he'd ever seen anyone walking around late. He shrugged and said that sometimes teenagers roam after midnight, but nothing unusual. When I asked the neighbor across the street, a retired man who reads outside every evening, his face changed immediately. "You saw him too?" he whispered. That stopped me cold. He told me he'd noticed someone walking the sidewalk around 3 a.m., maybe once or twice a week. But he assumed it was a shift worker coming home. He never saw the man stop or look toward houses. But the important thing was this. He'd been seeing him for months. That whole afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man had been watching our neighborhood far longer than any of us realized. Everything escalated one night later in the week. I had fallen asleep early, only to wake up with my heart racing, like I had been startled awake by something, though I didn't hear a sound. The digital clock read 3 a.m. exactly. My stomach dropped. I forced myself toward the window, but the moment I reached it, I felt a cold rush of fear hit me. The man wasn't on the sidewalk. He was standing in my yard, and he was closer than the night before, maybe 10 feet from my house, facing my window directly. His hood was pushed back. He had a narrow, pale face with eyes that didn't look like they were focusing on anything human, just unfocused and wide. His smile was bigger. Wrong. Like he didn't understand how to smile correctly. He didn't move when I looked at him. Not a finger. Not a breath. Just stood there in the yard like he'd been waiting for me to come to the window. I stumbled back so fast I tripped over the side of my bed. My heart felt like it was going to tear through my chest. After a few moments, I slowly peeked again. He was gone. No sound. No footsteps. No trail. Just gone. I barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, I called the non-emergency police line. They said they'd send an officer to patrol the area, but they couldn't do much unless he was trespassing or trying to break in. He was trespassing, I insisted. He was standing in my yard. Did he attempt to enter the home? They asked. No, he didn't. Not yet. But that didn't make me feel any better. I installed a camera the same day, a doorbell camera and one angled toward the front yard. Finally, I felt some level of control. But that night, around 2:50 a.m., I woke up again. Not slowly, not gradually. It was like something yanked me out of sleep. And immediately, I felt dread, heavy dread, the kind that tells you something is very, very wrong. I checked the live camera feed on my phone. At first, I didn't see anything, just my yard under the dim glow of the streetlight. Then he stepped in a frame, as if he'd been standing just outside the camera's view. He walked toward the bottom of the screen, directly toward my house. But something was different. His body wasn't stiff this time. It twitched, subtle, jerky movements like he was glitching. His head turned too far to the side, like he was forcing it past what a neck should allow. Then he lifted something toward the camera, a piece of cardboard. When he pressed it against the lens, the feed turned into a dark brown blur. But just before it covered the camera, I saw writing on it. "You still awake?" That's when I realized. He knew when I woke up. He always knew. Panic took over. I called 911. For once, they took it seriously. They told me to stay in my room, lock the door, and wait for officers to arrive. But while I was on the phone, I heard something outside. Soft footsteps. On my porch. Then the sound of someone brushing their fingers slowly along the wall, dragging across the siding. Scrape, scrape, scrape. They reached the window and stopped. The operator stayed on the line with me, telling me to remain calm. She said officers were 2 minutes away. 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. Then, suddenly, the sound stopped. Silence. Complete silence. 30 seconds later, police sirens echoed down the street. But when the officers checked outside, the man was gone again. The next morning, I checked my cameras. The one he covered was still useless. Cardboard had gotten stuck behind the lens. But the yard camera caught a clear view of him. His face. His twitching movements. His unnatural smile. I showed the footage to the police. 2 hours later, they showed it to the other neighbors. That's when the truth came out. At least 8 households admitted they'd seen him multiple times. Sometimes standing still in the cul-de-sac. Sometimes walking past their windows. Sometimes stopping at the edge of someone's lawn. But none of them ever reported it. Because he never did anything. Not at first. He would just watch. One neighbor said she had seen him every night for nearly a year. Every single night. Always around 3 a.m. Always walking the neighborhood. As if he was waiting for something or someone to notice him. The police increased patrols. For a week, everything was quiet. Then, without explanation, the late-night patrol cars stopped coming, and the man never returned. No more walking figure at 3 a.m. No more smiling face in the yard. No more tapping on the siding. He just disappeared. But here's the part that disturbed me most. 2 weeks ago, at exactly 3:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. New notification from my yard camera. I opened it immediately. There was no person in the frame, but the streetlight at the end of the block flickered hard, like someone walked under it. And even though the sidewalk looked empty, for a split second, the camera's motion sensor triggered a label. Person detected. Nothing else. No figure. No shadow. Just the system insisting someone was there. Watching. Still walking the neighborhood. Still waiting for someone else to wake up and see him. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood about 20 minutes outside Milwaukee. The type of place where people decorate early for every holiday, mow the lawn twice a week, and overly friendly neighbors wave every time they see you. I moved in last year because I wanted that kind of calm, predictable routines, normal days, quiet nights. Then in February, something started happening at exactly 1:47 a.m. Not 1:46, not 1:48, always 1:47. It began with the sound of a doorbell. My doorbell. The first time I heard it, I remember I had fallen asleep on the couch watching a crime documentary. I woke up disoriented, not sure if I was dreaming. The TV was still playing, but the volume was low. The room was dark except for the soft blue glow of the standby lights on my electronics. Then the doorbell rang again. This time it was clear, sharp, echoing through the hallway. Ding-dong. I checked the time on my phone. 1:47 a.m. I didn't answer. I didn't even go near the door. Instead, I peeked through the front window, brushing aside the curtain just enough to see the porch. Nobody was there. No car on the street. No footsteps in the snow. Nothing. My heart thudded hard, but after waiting several minutes, nothing else happened. I went back to sleep convincing myself it must have been a wiring glitch. It wasn't. The next night, at exactly the same time, 1:47 a.m., the doorbell rang again. This time it rang 3 times in a row. Ding-dong, ding-dong, ding-dong. I checked the porch. Still empty. But something was different. The fresh snow showed faint marks. Not footprints exactly, but strange wavy impressions. Like someone was dragging fabric or clothing instead of stepping. I took pictures before the wind covered them. When I zoomed in later, the pattern wasn't random. There were long, sweeping marks like someone kept shifting their weight without lifting their feet. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. On the third night, I decided to watch through the peephole. At 1:40 a.m., I turned off all the lights in the living room and waited. I stood in complete silence, my eye pressed to the peephole, staring into my own porch light's glow. I was so tense that I jumped when the refrigerator clicked on in the kitchen. 1:43 a.m. Nothing. 1:45 a.m. Still nothing. 1:46 a.m. My heart was racing. Then, 1:47 a.m. The doorbell didn't ring. Instead, someone exhaled on the other side of the door. A long, shaky breath. Not normal breathing. Not even creepy breathing. It sounded like someone trying to steady themselves. Like they were scared. My heart lurched. I nearly stepped back, but I forced myself to stay still and keep looking through the peephole. There was no one there. But the breath continued. Slow. Uneven. Right on the other side of the wood. Then the doorknob twitched. Just barely. Like someone lightly touched it with trembling fingers. After 20 seconds, the breathing stopped. Then I heard soft footsteps, dragging, shuffling footsteps, moving away from the porch. I didn't open the door until sunrise. The next morning, I called an electrician. He checked the wiring and confirmed the doorbell was working perfectly. No glitches, no shorts, nothing malfunctioning. There was no technical explanation for what I'd been hearing. That night, I armed the house. Locked all windows. Deadbolt every door. Kept the lights on. At 1:47 a.m., the doorbell rang. Once. Softly. Almost politely. Then again, but this time the ring stretched longer than it should have, like someone was holding the button down. I grabbed my phone and checked my security cameras. The live feed showed absolutely nothing. Just my porch, empty. But I heard the sound of someone stepping onto the wooden boards directly outside the door. Creak, creak. Then the camera glitched. The feed flickered with static, something it had never done before. And when it returned for one split second, I saw a figure. A tall, thin shape standing so close to the door that the porch light barely reached them. Their head tilted slightly to the side, like they were listening for movement. Their arm was raised, their finger pressed to the doorbell. The feed snapped back to normal immediately. The figure was gone. Just my empty porch again. I called the police. They sent an officer who was polite, but clearly skeptical. He checked the property, walked around the house, and found nothing. No footprints in the snow. No signs of forced entry. Nothing unusual. Before leaving, he said something that stuck with me. Try to ignore late-night sounds. The mind plays tricks when it's dark and quiet. I wanted to yell at him, but I didn't. Things escalated about a week later. By then, the doorbell had rung 7 nights in a row. Always at 1:47 a.m. Always when the porch camera briefly glitched. But on the 8th night, something new happened. Instead of ringing, the doorbell spoke. Not a voice, not actual speech. It made a sound, a deep, vibrating humming noise like someone dragging wood across metal. The sound came through the doorbell speaker. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then the doorknob turned. Slowly, deliberately. I backed away, terrified. I called 911 again, but halfway through the call, something happened that still makes my blood run cold. The doorbell camera finally caught the figure clearly. A tall person, but not standing normally. Their spine was bent at an unnatural angle. Their arms hung too long, and their head was tilted downward, like they were staring at something on the ground. But the part that disturbed me most was their face, or rather, the lack of one. The face was blurred, not pixelated by the camera, but naturally blurred, like their features were smudged across their skin. Like their face was in motion even when they weren't moving. They lifted one hand, not to the doorbell, not to the camera, but to the peephole, and they tapped on it. 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, staring at the live feed. On the stream, the figure stood absolutely still. But the sound of tapping was happening on my side of the door. They weren't tapping the camera. They were tapping the peephole from inside the camera's view. Something impossible was happening. I grabbed the largest kitchen knife I owned and hid behind the couch until the police arrived. When they checked the porch, the figure was gone again. But this time they did find something. On the doormat, a small piece of paper, folded in half, like a note. Inside it was written, "Don't look, just answer." They took the note as evidence. For the next 3 nights, nothing happened. I started to sleep again. I convinced myself whatever it was had stopped. Then last Thursday, at exactly 1:47 a.m., I woke up. Not from the doorbell, not from footsteps, but because someone whispered directly through the door. Just one word. Please. Soft. Begging. Desperate. The voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It sounded like someone who needed help. But the doorbell camera showed nothing. No figure. No shadow. Just static for a full 30 seconds. Then the feed returned. The porch was empty again, except for one thing. A single handprint, pressed on the glass. Long fingers. Too long. The police don't have answers. Neighbors haven't seen anything. The snow never shows footprints. But every night, I sit awake before 1:47 a.m., waiting, terrified, because whatever comes to my door, it's not random. It knows when I'm awake. It knows when I'm watching. And deep down, I know one day it won't ring the doorbell. It won't whisper. It'll just open the door and step inside.